I'd rather put rocks in my pocket and walk into the ocean. I mean, part of the creative process is doing the work. And I respect that. And I don't want a shortcut. Somebody shared a meme on social media that was like, I want AI to clean my house and do my vacuuming so that I can be creative. I don't want to have AI be creative so that I can clean homes and do the vacuuming. I don't need AI to do the work that I enjoy doing.
Hello, I'm Bruce Berman, the host of Understanding IP Matters, the critically acclaimed podcast series that provides leading innovators and experts a space to share their IP story. Learn firsthand about the strengths and weaknesses of copyrights, patents, trademarks, and trade secrets as they adapt to an AI-driven world. This is our 4th season. Elizabeth Nelson is an innovator who defies easy classification. She's lead singer-songwriter for the respected garage punk band, The Paranoid Style, which Spin magazine ranks as one of the best. She is also an accomplished journalist reporting on culture for a wide range of publications, including The Washington Post and The New Yorker. She is also a Washington, D.C.-based education policy consultant. Music, culture, golf, and copywriting are among her interests. The allusions in her provocative songs resist easy categories. Not unexpectedly, her LinkedIn page displays 61 interests. As an educational consultant, she participated in a 3-year study of the effects of literacy intervention on struggling middle schoolers. Elizabeth is steadfastly in the corner of creators. Her recent article in the Sunday New York Times Magazine, Bad Pennies, served up a critical analysis of the 2-part Paramount docuseries, How Music Got Free. Music, she argues, may be more accessible to listeners today, but at a high cost to creativity, culture, and musician survival. Good morning, Elizabeth. It's really good to meet you. Thanks for joining us. Where are you speaking from?
Good morning. I am in Durham, North Carolina, currently, just sitting in our apartment, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for asking me to be on the show.
You're a successful journalist and cultural commentator who's also a musician and singer-songwriter. How did that happen?
I wouldn't say it was through any grand design or anything. I've been playing music since I was very, very young, and I started writing songs when I was a teenager. I formed the Paranoid Style in 2012 and have been playing, in that band since then, put out a lot of records on the Barnum Records label and had some success doing that. And I've also had, either through the band or just through other opportunities, the capacity and been offered the opportunity to publish in highly regarded, depending on your opinion, publications like Oxford American, the New Yorker, New York Times. With that came a profile that allowed my band to flourish as well. And one certainly, has sort of abetted the other, I guess. But no, it wasn't like I sat down one day and said, I'm going to be a cultural critic as well as a songwriter. It just helps, that having 2 sets of skills allows me to do a couple of different things.
The New York Times piece about the Paramount Channel documentary, How the Music Got Free, you write about the market-driven utopia for music that seems not to have materialized despite the hype.
I think this is somewhat specific to the documentary itself, which goes, and I talk about this in the article, but it goes to pains to treat the streaming economy as some manner of brilliant panacea to everything that once afflicted the music industry. And this is, to their telling of it, a terrific win for musicians and consumers alike. And so, when I wrote the article and discussed this in the article, it seemed awfully rich to me, but I think it's a pretty good representation of the standard industry party line amongst the streaming services and labels. The majority of musicians that I know in the current system, so, and I'm, just an indie-based person. I'm not in a major label or anything. This is like larceny to me. And so music consumers can enjoy the easy access to the entire history of recorded music. Just pick up your phone and it's part of your data package. I don't think that there are those who are truly passionate about music or who create music or who run labels like the label that I'm on or whatever, who are, thrilled that their art is being sold as a loss leader for your data package and your cell phone plan. But the industry titans would believe that they've arrived at this perfect compromise. So they get wealthy, and an even smaller number of consensus driven artists get the bulk of the revenue that come out of the streaming services. And this is like not unique. Like this is something that is, has been reported on.
It's just sort of amazing that people don't get this. And they think the pirates are the good guys. And that's been going on for years. And that I think, I know it's a myth perpetuated by certain forces. And this is also true in the inventing world, where you have patent trolls. And that patent troll narrative has been orchestrated over like the last decade or two. And it's very powerful. And average people think if you want to license your invention, you're a bad guy, you're a troll. The documentary, co-produced by LeBron James, of all people, treats the rise of online filing services, and we talked about this a bit, as what you describe as a first an astonishment, then a nuisance, and then an existential threat, and then a panacea. The original pirates judged it to be pioneers, lit only the clear path forward for the music industry, you say. What might have been another path forward, if not this path?
Criticize it all you want, and I wouldn't disagree with you. There used to be a thriving music ecosystem of artists and labels and people who worked for artists and labels, whether it's publicists or A&R, as well as terrestrial brick and mortar music stores, independent venues that were thriving. And I mean, as I say, was it perfect? God, no. But it's certainly better than what we currently have, which is fairly bare bones. So I think if we had been able to at least, maintain some of that ecosystem to keep it healthy, that would have been certainly a better alternative to what it is.
That system certainly wasn't perfect. It's interesting. You mentioned David Lowery, and he was on NPR some years ago, and he talked about meet the new boss worse than the old boss.
Right.
And I've written about that. And, certainly the 50s, if not the early 60s for the music industry, it was somewhat onerous. Artists had a battle for their royalties, and, there weren't the most perfect practices. But I think they offered more support and more openness to musicians and styles and types of music than exists today from the labels.
For sure. It was highly imperfect. But I mean, if you even think about like radio in the 80s, where you had people who would go into the station and actually program a show, there was, a pretty diverse swath of artists that you would hear at the middle of the dial. If you turned on, when I was growing up on Long Island, like Z100 in the morning, you would hear Madonna, you hear Bruce Springsteen, you'd hear Prince, you'd hear Michael Jackson, Cyndi Lauper, like it wasn't just this completely pre-programmed set of songs. And I mean, like, while it's like, well, they're all, pop artists, I guess, as a like large general term, they're very, very different when you think about it at the end of the day in terms of the songs they write, the subject matter that they consider when they're writing songs. And you just hear that over the course of like eating breakfast or whatever. So I do think, there is an argument that there was, certainly a diversity on terrestrial mainstream radio. And then there were also independent stations that could thrive. There's still a wide, diversity of music. I'm not gonna say that there aren't, diverse folks making music in some of the, it's obviously the streaming economy has afforded some more exposure. I got some pushback from people who felt like, oh, well, I wouldn't have gotten noticed if I didn't have streaming to help me. And that's fantastic. I'm really happy for those people. And I'm not going to say that exposure isn't great, but you can't pay the bills with exposure.
How do you pay the bills today? Like you're have a really interesting background that you're a journalist for major publications. You're a policy analyst and researcher. Does that allow you to do pretty much what you want musically? or do you have to worry about how you can finance your music activities?
I worry all the time. Financial anxiety is a very real thing for myself and for lots of artists that I know, to the point of being detrimental to some of them. I actually work currently as a copywriter for Fender guitars, but everything that I do is freelance and contract work. So I would scarcely say that, music is paying the bills at all for me. I'm lucky, and I don't want to sugarcoat that. I'm fortunate that I do get to write for places like the Times, and other outlets that some of them can still pay a reasonable rate for a piece, but it's scarcely a living wage. And, journalism is kind of suffering a lot of the same problems of the music industry. And so publications are drying up and it's harder and harder to find places. As I say, I'm very fortunate, but I know lots of journalists who are losing their jobs. Pitchfork kind of pulled a lot of its operations back and sent it under as a GQ vertical, as I recall. And that used to be one of the most important music publications of the current age. I think that Spin and Rolling Stone are still magazines that exist, but I haven't gone and picked up a copy. I don't even know if they still have print. But I pay the bills doing whatever job I can possibly get, and that's just how I have crafted my living. And I think a lot of artists do have to kind of cobble together an existence, but most of the people I know have day jobs.
You have to hope, I think, today as a musician that you have a degree of loyalty kind of facilitated by social media. And you seem to have that. You have, I don't know how many, I think you have about 20,000 Twitter followers, as I recall, ex-Twitter follows. That's great. But if it wasn't for that, you'd be cast adrift, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And it's funny because I feel like whenever people kind of mention my bio, the Twitter comes up frequently. I mean, there was a New Yorker piece that was written about the band, but also about the Twitter, which I think is amazing. I certainly didn't set out to be a Twitter content creator. It kind of makes me sick that I work for Twitter for free. I'm happy that I've, created a little enclave on a terrible place for people to talk about music in a constructive way. And I think a healthy way. And it's entirely a community that I've cultivated, and it's mostly music fans, and I assume Russian bots or something, but I can't deny that Twitter wasn't useful in terms of, it sounds so gross, but advancing my brand, and getting people interested in the music I create, the things that I write. So social media can be helpful in terms of allowing people to showcase what they're good at.
The technology is cheaper. I mean, it's easier to make a quality recording today, much easier than, say, 30 years ago. But getting it out there and getting it heard is tough. Forgive me for quoting from the Times article. It was just so spot on, and you articulated so well. That really took me in. You said, without rock criticism and exposure to new and different music, it's just more consensus. Let's just bring in more Taylor Swift. Let's just agree that we all like this one thing. Fewer commercial options mean less competition and lower risk. And that's true of the movie industry. It's true of technology. What do you think we're going in this direction? What's happening here?
Well, as far as consensus driven art and artists, I don't know that I have a very helpful answer to this. It seems bad to me as far as directions that we're going in. If we all just agree that, the best movies are Marvel comic movies, and we're going to see a lot of Marvel comic movies. And that's not to say that there aren't, fantastic films that are being made, great ones, but it gets harder and harder to get those movies made. And I certainly know people in those industries who are struggling as well. I don't mean to pick on Taylor Swift. She constantly comes to mind because she's quite ubiquitous. And so if you go to your data plan and you look at your Spotify or your Apple Music or whatever your streaming service of choice is, I don't know why I said data plan. I think I meant to say cell phone. But if you go to your cell phone and you look at your Spotify or your Apple Music, like it's going to be suggesting, the same artists, regardless of the fact that maybe you put on a jazz record yesterday and I, put on the Minutemen. It's still going to be like, here you go, like check out Drake. Not that Drake isn't great either, but like it seems like, the whatever the algorithm is isn't even really working for me. It's just like, oh, like we need to advance just this handful of artists. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's just a thing that happens where there are decisions that are made that these are the artists that we're going to promote. And these are the movies that we're going to promote. These are the TV shows that are going to get the biggest exposure. It just comes at you.
It's economics, and I think it's risk. There's just less risk with that. I mean, Bob Dylan's first album, I hear repeatedly, I think it sold a few thousand copies, and it was really a failure. Someone stuck with him, I think it was John Hammond, to let him grow in that context. I don't think you have much time for that today. Musicians may be the canaries in the coal mine, disruptive innovation, less of a business priority. Disruption can be great, but it could be dangerous for the incumbent, if you will. I'm saying rhetorically, there's no answer. What does it mean culturally? What does it mean technologically, economically? I think technology is advanced to the point now where you can monitor usage much better, and artists and inventors and others can get paid. They just choose not to use the technology that way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I definitely think that the technology exists to make this, a more equitable system. But why bother? I mean, if you're the one who is standing to profit from it, and there's not, I mean, this is another unfortunate thing about musicians, but also freelance journalists is it's very, very hard to unionize. And so, there's no protections for musicians in that way.
I was a freelancer. I interviewed Patti Smith many years ago. A lot of interesting stuff in another life. But yeah, you're right about that. You once told an interviewer that you were tremendously proud of Print the Legend. It's a song you wrote. It's a great song, by the way, great rock song. The title comes from a line in a John Ford movie that I taught at Columbia. Another life, I taught film at Columbia, MFA. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which is based on a Dorothy Johnson short story. It's interesting to compare the story and the film. That's what we were doing. But the line where the legend becomes fact, print the legend, what makes this song so special to you?
Thanks for highlighting that one because it is one of my favorites. And it's also The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is also a great Gene Pitney song that you should go listen to today on your Spotify.
That's one of the great things, though, about Spotify and Apple Music is that you hear something and you like it. You used to have to go to the record store. Now you just grab it. You don't own it, but you can have access to it.
For sure. And the convenience is great, but it sucks because there are now like 50,000 shuttered record stores across the country. But anyway, getting back to Print the Legend and why I like that song. I mean, I like story songs. It's a genre of writing that I think is really fun and interesting, and certainly one that, when done well, can be very moving and, illustrative. And so I was very proud of the way it came out. It was modeled after a song by Robert Earl Keen called The Road Goes On Forever. And another great story song about some tragic folks. And just the idea of printing the legend is one that's a line that's always stuck with me. And I thought, yeah, that would be a great song. And so I turned it into this thing about, two very, very stupid people who did something very dumb and it didn't go well. So doing a story song like that as a genre exercise was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's sort of a parable for social media.
Yes.
Print the legend, it doesn't matter. And I remember that movie very well, even though it was in the early 60s, I believe. It was still black and white. And it works really well as a black and white movie. It's a very good movie, John Ford. Has the term middle-class musician become an oxymoron? Are there no middle-class musicians? Or you can be a middle-class musician, perhaps, but you have to do some other things, like yourself. You have to have other vocations.
I'm sure that the second that I say that I don't think that there are middle class musicians, a billion middle class musicians will emerge and say, well, look at me. For me personally, I don't think that it's very easy to make a middle class wage doing music alone. And again, this goes back to this conversation that we were having about a once thriving ecosystem that is now at death's door, if not, already completely through it. Yes, you can have a middle class lifestyle, you can have generational wealth, you can have a job that pays well, that allows you to do music. And I think more often than not, if you polled 10 musicians, probably you know 8 of them would say that when they go on tour they barely break even. Some of them do worse than that, and touring is very hard and very rigorous. My friend Chuck Prophet was quoting somebody, but he calls it like the treadmill of death or something. And it's like you record an album, you promote the album, you tour, repeat. And it's unending, and it's becoming less and less financially viable. And more often than not, you'll see headlines about like genuinely popular bands.
Like David's band, Cracker, terrific rock and roll band. And they have 21 albums out over 30, 35 years in business, one form or another. And I think he said he got $57 for 1 million streams of the song Low, his biggest hit on Spotify.
Yeah, and he's a great example because he was like, when I remember, being in high school or college or whatever, and that song was like on MTV constantly. I mean, he was like a legitimately big deal musician who was probably making something of a living out of it. And I mean, I don't know how he's doing today. I hope well.
He's a professor. Got his PhD. He's a professor at the University of Georgia teaching the business of music.
I mean, and he's one of the good guys who's fighting the good fight. But yeah, I mean, Cracker could probably reunite and go out on the road and probably, sell out some good rooms. But I think he would say it would be foolhardy for him to try and make a middle class living out of it. So yeah, I don't think that the middle class is an option for musicians anymore, unless, as I say, you're doing some, fancy footwork around where your other revenue streams are coming from.
Talking about labels, I think originally I read that the major labels, or 4 of the major labels, I think there are only 4 or 5, owned 18% of Spotify equity. And Spotify complains, I mean, they've never had a profitable year. I think this will be their first profitable year. But their revenue stream is 15 billion and their market value is 70 billion. So, you could, a producer friend of mine said, well, why don't they just share a little bit of the equity with some artists? If you don't have the revenue or the profitability to pay them, share the equity, but they don't have to do that. And musicians don't know to ask for that.
The streaming services aren't going to do it. So we need to somehow implement some kind of regulation. And I think, it's what recently happened with the antitrust against Google might be a bellwether for what's to come. That'd be, fantastic if we could break this up a little bit. But I definitely don't think that it's going to be possible for artists to do on their own. I mean, I think it's gotten so big that we kind of need to bring in the regulator. And I know that sounds like a bummer hang, but it's something that I think is absolutely necessary. And I there was a bill that came out, and I don't know, it probably just died on the floor or whatever, but like, I think it's coming. I definitely think that if it doesn't, then we're doomed.
Just very briefly, the Robert Kearns, who invented the intermittent windshield wipers, that famous movie, The Flash of Genius. And this was in the early 90s, and Ford literally stole it from him, although they never admitted it publicly. They did settle, and a bunch of other car companies. But to make a long story short, he really wanted them to admit that they stole it, but they would never do that. But I've written about it. I have 120,000 hits on that particular piece on the movie, because the movie's popular and people look for it. But what's interesting is people say to me all the time, and I get comments, this is so terrible. It destroyed him. It destroyed his family. It's true. It did. And it can never be it's not like that now, right? I said, no, it's much worse. What are you talking about? It's much worse. That's 30 years ago. You had a shot back then. Now you don't have it. You have much less of a percentage of winning as an independent inventor. the public, and that's hence, the Center for IP Understanding, we're trying to help professionals help the public understand, or not just professionals, artists, creative. What's the disconnect here? We have to do a better job to put that in context. I'm sorry to go on, but the high school debate this year, 24, 25, big national high school debate is going to be on IP rights. Should they be strengthened in the US? That's shocking. I've written about it. It's wonderful because kids are going to start to think about, what is the system all about and who does it really benefit?
Sure. That's fantastic. I mean, what a rich area for kids to get into. And I know that we need them to fight for this and care about, because I mean, a middle class lifestyle in general is going to be difficult for, I don't even know what gen we're at this point, but I work with people in their early and late mid-20s, and I mean they're very, very upfront about it, saying, "I will never be able to afford a home. I will not be able to have a family." And these are creative people who work every day and go to work. I mean, so like that's fantastic that they are going to debate IP rights. I mean, I think that's wonderful.
And not just debate, but should they be strengthened? CIPU, we're talking to folks who are, orchestrating the debate and just reminding them where they're getting their information. And if it's from Google, we have to be careful. We just have to be mindful of the sources of, how they're being forming their arguments. But in any case, you received your master's degree in secondary science education from Columbia University Teachers College.
That is factually inaccurate, actually. I received my master's degree in sociology from Indiana University, Bloomington.
Oh, so where did I get that from?
I don't know, Google it, I guess.
Yes. Well, anyway, but you have an interest in education policy, especially literacy interventions, and that interests me too. Not so much reading literacy, but IP literacy. It's very dear to us, to me, and something we work on. And what is good IP behavior? What is the minimum amount of understanding of IP? You don't have to know a lot, but just some very basics. But you have an interest in education. How did that happen? And what are you doing in that area?
Well, I mean, I had an interest in sociology as a college student, maybe overly idealistic, as all college students should be, I suppose. And I was good at it and pursued my master's degree in sociology. And within my field of expertise or study, I guess, was qualitative research methods. And I was involved in a study of early literacy acquisition as part of my master's program and early childhood education. And that, because I had to get a job after I got my degree, I managed to land myself in literacy research. From there, the world of policy opened itself up to me. And I'm not going to say there's anything wrong with wanting to help kids learn to read.
No, I think you're kind of a role model, or you can be. You're putting things together that you like to do that seem to influence each other. One activity influences the other. And you're doing pretty much what you want, I think.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I would like to do something more lucrative some days. Yeah, as I say, I'm very fortunate and I'm very lucky that I have managed to carve out a couple little niches in areas where my levels of interest are, whether it is literacy acquisition or golf or, rock and roll. I mean, that's pretty lucky. So yes.
I love the diversity of interests. It's just really fascinating to me.
Thank you.
And I do think they matter in the long run. I'm not sure how, but I think they do.
Well, I mean, it's tough to make a living, man. You gotta, you gotta diversify, I guess, because everything's kind of shutting down. And so, when one publication shutters, then, you have to kind of figure out something else to do. And I mean, as I say, I don't think that I'm a good model for anybody, because I think it's really hard. I think you have to work really hard. And if you can just be a really good doctor, I would say do that rather than trying to cobble together an existence of multi-hyphenate resume items.
I look at these YouTube videos about like London in the 60s, even before the Beatles, and how musicians were coming together, blues musicians, and it seems like everyone did well. It seems that way. I'm sure it's not the case. It reminds me of the movie Inside Llewyn Davis. Do you know that movie?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's very dark, but I love it because he could have been a Bob Dylan, but there are probably hundreds of folks that could have been a Bob Dylan, but they just didn't happen for them. So where do they go? In his case, not too far. Let me ask you quickly. We have a limited amount of time. What about AI? Scraping is rampant and training mostly free for the leading LLMs. Copyright is more in the spotlight, which I think is great. I think it's the tail that wags the dog. It's getting people to think about, what do I own? What do they own? Who should be paid for what? And I think that's a healthy discussion. Right now, they're not making much progress, but I think that will evolve. Already, I think it's ChatGPT is signing deals with publishers and actually paying for stuff. What do you think the influence of AI on the music industry and your work is going to be? Is it a tool for doing good work, or is it just something to deal with?
The truth is, I don't know. And I think, a big part of the problem, if we want to call it a problem, is that technology is proprietary and it's constantly evolving, but it also operates with this vernacular that's like pretty impenetrable to anyone who isn't really an expert in the field. And so consequently, big tech people and big tech companies are running out in front of regulators or the general public, and nobody knows what they're talking about. So it's like, oh, this is so exciting, AI. And so like, it makes it hard to even know like what are the reasonable measures to take in order to avoid the more pernicious outcomes. And the tech companies, their motto is move fast, break stuff. Very cute, very terrifying, has a little light fascism to it that I think is, and maybe I'm just a Cassandra figure here, but I think that there's every reason to be concerned about the worst possible outcomes when it comes to AI. Now, I'm not like total sci-fi doomsayer that it's like they're going to develop sentient feelings and they're just going to come for our hearts and souls, but they're definitely coming for our jobs and already are. I personally think that left unregulated and unbidden, the larger interests of a functioning society are not the concerns of big tech, who are developing these AI tools. So, as I say, like, I do think that there are some measures being taken by Justice Department, and we saw this with Apple and Google, but I'm really skeptical and very concerned about, how we're going to regulate AI going forward. And as far as what it's going to do for music, I mean, I sort of just kind of glossed on this in that piece about how, Spotify is, I think they're currently actually maybe employing actual people, but they're kind of creating these sound-alike songs that go onto playlists, and then they get all of that profit from that music. And you can make a pretty decent pastiche of a 60s girl group song, using your chat GPT. Or I don't actually use AI because I'm that afraid of it. So I don't go in and say write me, a girl pop song about,
It's pretty frightening. Do you think it'll be net positive for creators, AI, or it's just too early to tell?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's too early to tell. As I say, I'm deeply concerned about it because, as I say, I don't think that they're just going to take us over and enslave us. But I definitely think that for somebody who writes copy as one of my skills and one of my jobs, one of the things that actually pays me, I think it would be very easy to train an AI to write copy that is warm or in a particular brand voice, makes it seem like a human is actually writing it. And that's yet another job that will go away from a person who once made, a living wage doing that line of work. And so I personally, I don't understand how it could be a useful tool for anybody who considers themselves a creator in any creative way. I don't need AI to come up with a chord progression for me.
What if it came up with a chord progression that you didn't think about, and then you were able to elaborate on it? So it got you, 20% further. It saved you time. It was efficient. Could that be useful?
No, not to me. I'd rather put rocks in my pocket and walk into the ocean. I'm being very serious with you. I mean, part of the creative process is doing the work. And I respect that. And I don't want a shortcut. I don't want, I want somebody shared like a meme, which, God, that's just a sentence that I never thought I'd say. So, but somebody shared a meme on social media that was like, I want AI to clean my house and do my vacuuming so that I can be creative. I don't want to have AI be creative so that I can clean homes and do the vacuuming. I don't need AI to do the work that I enjoy doing. And I do enjoy working. I mean, like it's not like I'm looking to, just lounge and let AI write my songs or write my copy or, do my research for me. So yeah, I don't have any warmth for it. And I don't think it has any warmth for me or you or anybody.
Final thoughts that you'd like to leave listeners with?
Check out The Paranoid Style, listen to The Interrogator, buy a copy, please, from an independent retailer. And I mean, I can't stop anybody from enjoying Spotify or Apple Music, and I use it myself. So I'm not going to say don't enjoy it. But if you consider yourself a fan, figure out, ways to engage with artists that, help them get paid. But also, we don't need a patronage system. I mean, we need real, genuine change. So go out and vote this November. I'm not going to, say who I think you should vote for because I probably shouldn't do any electioneering on here, but vote for the person who you think might actually help out artists. And I think, that's probably one of the best ways that we can possibly do this. So think about your down ballot candidates, get involved and, be a part of the change that we need.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Understanding IP Matters is brought to you by the nonprofit Center for Intellectual Property Understanding with the generous support of its partners and sponsors. Gain access to all 4 seasons by subscribing for free on your favorite platform or email us at explore.understandingip.org. Content conveyed is for informational purposes only and does not represent the views of CIPU or its affiliates. This episode was produced by Jack Shields for Wild Creek Studios. Thank you for listening.